the sort of next stock market sort of driver. And I was reading that there's 3 22-year-olds. I'm very jealous, but there are 3 22-year-olds who are a founder of a company called Merkle. They're an AI recruiting startup, but they're now the youngest self-made billionaires. So perhaps there's a future in this digital larky. So let's all keep our fingers crossed. But we were talking about, has data suddenly become the new talking point? Probably not. But what makes AI work is data, and we know that. But I don't know whether that is a sort of general realization, and whether actually people care. So, what does that mean for the future? Have you got any sort of views on that, Kevin?
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, it's been interesting, talking to sort of various clients and people across the industry around the potential for AI. And I think from a government perspective, there's been a lot of focus on sectors who are seen as being slow to adopt, and construction is one of those. So if you look at, for example, the Bridge AI program, that was run by UK Research and Innovation to really start to accelerate the adoption of AI across the construction sector. Now, I've challenged that a little bit and been doing quite a bit of research to understand, well, where are we within the industry and what are the use cases that people are exploring? And I think we're seeing a lot of AI uptake in the world of project management, as an example. Thinking about solutions from companies like Nplan, the ability now to generate a baseline program, from a project scope document. And I guess, for that to work effectively, you've got to make sure that that scope document contains the right information and knowledge for AI to be able to take it forward. So I guess I'm a little bit challenging towards that view that we're slow to uptake AI. I think the sector is looking to adopt it. I think that the role of information and data is of course fundamental. The old saying of rubbish in, rubbish out. I guess the thing that I find most fascinating is that if we think about neural networks as an example, they were designed originally to help us gain a better understanding of how the human brain works, and they actually mimic, in that case, the way that we think as humans. So I think there's a role in making sure we get information and data right. I also think, though, there's an opportunity to educate AI to tell it what bad data and information looks like as well. And I think that, as someone that does a lot of work in the water sector, as an example, a large water company will have billions of records of data of varying quality, spanning over decades. And I think there's an opportunity, if we teach AI what good and bad data looks like, to help us manage that legacy data and information in a much more streamlined way.
So we've got a pretty good foundation, haven't we? And harping back to the BIM mandate, good old BIM mandate days, BIM level 2. Everyone will remember that. The PAS 1192. Sorry, I'm going back in. It feels like years ago now, but it's probably not that long ago. We're now, we've got the ISO 19650 suites. We've had the interoperability expert group that came out of Digital Built Britain, and we've had obviously the interoperability. We've had the expert group actually came up with the code of practice for delivering valuable data as well. And I just wonder whether some of these documents, and because this leads in, I think, to the IMI, the Information Management Initiative as well, that we're sort of looking at the shiny stuff and maybe not really sort of going back and making sure we get the basics right, which will make AI and data manipulation sort of better moving forward. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. I think that, as has been discussed earlier this morning, I think the level of maturity differs across the sector. I think that there's possibly a role for artificial intelligence to help organizations manage their information more effectively. I was reading an interesting research paper around BIM GPT. I don't know if anyone's come across this, but a set of researchers using AI to make information easier to access and easier to analyze, to drive insight that will ultimately lead to better decision making. So I think there is a role for AI in making information management much more accessible, in particular for organizations, as Anna was saying, around RMI, for smaller organizations who perhaps don't have the technical capability. I think there's an opportunity to use AI to help bridge that skills gap and help democratize the role of information management across the sector.
That's really interesting, because I think one thing with information management, because I was looking at some sort of online articles, which I know you have to be careful of, but I think I picked up a stat that we only use about approximately 4% of the information that we collect. So we only use about 4% of it to sort of drive ourselves forward. And I think this leak into AI, I think, will help us use a lot more of that data, because we'll be using it without us knowing. So that's great. And there was one of the other bits for me, though, is to try and get the value chain delivery, because there was another stat, and I think it sort of stands up, that I think, in fact, it was a report from Deloitte that said about 80% of construction companies acknowledge significant gaps in their data capabilities. And I think that was a bit around, we're doing stuff at design stage, but we're not transferring it into on-site, and then we're not taking the on-site stuff and transferring it into operations. So we've got pockets of great stuff, but we're not linking it up. Do you think, the future and AI and getting our data structures right might help that a bit?
I do, yeah. I'm a huge fan and advocate for whole life sort of digital and data assets. I think we do need to view information and data as assets. And I think there's been some good examples with National Highways as an example, who valued their data estate, and that's driven quite a significant change in behaviours. I think if we view it that way, we can manage the flow of information across the gated life cycle, and really importantly into operations and maintenance. Of course, that means interaction with a wide range of stakeholders, both in terms of delivering and constructing the built asset, but also making sure that we're meeting the needs of operations and maintenance staff. And I think certainly on a large project, that process of information management can become quite complex. And I think that AI can hopefully, sort of break down some of those complexity barriers, and make access to information and data a lot more streamlined. And I think really importantly, help us manage some of that complexity. So if you think about a large infrastructure project, the number of stakeholders that you need to engage with at each stage of the life cycle is enormous. And I think that, we don't harness that data and that information to help us with robust decision making. So I do see a role for AI in this. I guess my apprehension is around the guardrails for AI. I guess anyone that's used, sort of ChatGPT or some of the other tools on the market, you've always got to, as a human, sort of test and validate the outputs from AI. And I think as we start to rely on the technology more and more, we've got to be really clear as an industry around what are the right guardrails that we need to put in place to make sure that AI is used safely and securely across the sector.
I think that's a really good point. That there's a lot of organisations, and I'll bring it back to the Information Management Initiative as well, because there is a bit that I think I don't want to be negative, but we want organisations to be signing up to the IMI, because I think from their perspective it starts to get them aligned as an organisation to try and sort of drive this sort of focus on data through, because the more that they understand it, I think it will start to unlock their understanding of what they need to do in terms of verifying and validating data and outputs. Because at the end of all this, we've all got insurance companies and statutory obligations that actually are not allowing for AI at all. We can't just say, well, we made a mistake, but AI told me to do it. So we've got to get that right. So I think understanding, taking a sort of motoring analogy, you can't just drive the car. I think in this instance, we do need to understand what makes it go, because if we don't, I think we could drive ourselves into a bit of a dead end, not wanting to take that automobile analogy any further.
I definitely agree. And I think from an information management perspective, what are the implications from a, legal and commercial perspective? All of these things need to be considered when we are applying AI in the realm of construction. So I think there's an opportunity actually to extend, information management to a broader range of stakeholders. Obviously, at the moment, it's very focused on capital delivery process. But if you imagine all the different touch points, you've got to engage with local authorities, you've got to engage with government, depending on the size of the projects. And I think that information management could be extended to provide the framework for good data management that will enable good use of AI across construction.
Just thinking while you were talking there, because take the operations bit, because I think definitely there's obviously sort of advantages in getting this right in the capital delivery stage, but the operation and maintenance of the assets that we build, by far the bigger investment. So GSL, we had government soft landings, and we always said, think of the start with the end in mind, and we get the phrase right. And so it was about understanding people's data requirements. Do you think that we still need to do that, or do you think we'll do it by default because we've got all this data, or do you think some of this stuff will become automated in the way that we're sort of collecting information if we get the asset right?
So I guess I'd pick on an example actually. So you've got organisations like Northumbrian Water, Anglian Water. I do a lot of work in the water sector, hence using these examples. But they're already using AI in the space of operations and maintenance. We're, as an industry, starting to think much more now around system level control, and AI is a good tool to enable that. And Northumbrian Water, as an example, running a smart sewers program, which is enabling them to use the sewer as an addition to storage to help avoid pollution events into rivers. Now that relies on all of the good existing information and data that exists in the operational space. And I think as we learn from these good use cases, we can start to standardize and formalize some of the underlying data and information management structures so that others can adopt it more broadly. So I think there's definitely a need to share some of these good practices and knowledge and information so that we can continue to evolve the underlying information management standards. I think it's absolutely critical, particularly when we're talking about operating and maintaining critical national infrastructure. I do always come back though to the guardrails. We've got to make sure that we're doing this in the right way, with the right policies, procedures, and governance in place, so that AI, doesn't become a threat to the industry, essentially.
And sort of looping back to what we were saying, I guess some of those guardrails we could, because we've got this whole suite of stuff that we've been doing since sort of pre the BIM mandate, but the stuff that we've certainly been doing sort of since sort of 2010, we've got a great sort of foundation for this to move on to. And does it frustrate you a bit that we're still talking about, trying to get people to align to 19650 and understand some of these other codes of practices that we've got, that we've still got people just saying, I want BIM? And is that starting to become, I won't say the word annoying, but are you becoming frustrated by it?
I'm actually going to take a positive spin. I think if I go back 10 years, I think that, we take part in major projects, thinking about HS2 and others as examples. You know, the BIM team was a team kind of sat in the corner, you know, not, and I'll be completely open and transparent, you know, not part of the, we didn't feel like we're kind of part of the project. I think though behaviours are changing. I think for me, the thing that's made a difference is we're now starting to think about it through the lens of personas and people. So as a project manager, how does information management support you in your day-to-day role? Well, you know, you can generate the insight you need to be able to de-risk the program, optimize the project, and all the other good things that go with that. So I actually think now information management isn't seen as a kind of a black box exercise. I think people are starting to really recognize the value of it. And I think that as we start to trial and use AI more and more, I think the importance of good data and good information management practices is going to become ever more evident. As you said, and as we said at the start, you know, rubbish in, rubbish out, right? So we've got to get the foundations correct to be able to drive adoption. But I personally have a much more positive view of information management, certainly within larger projects. What I would say though, you know, picking up on the conversation earlier with Anna from the NHIC, there's a lot more to do in democratizing information management so that it is more accessible to micro businesses across the sector, as an example. And again, I do wonder if there's a role for AI in helping us do that.
Yeah, so I think maybe the old model was around sort of concentrating on outputs. I think the new model probably focused on trying to sort of deliver outcomes, and I think that changes the continuum, because if data is the continuum that runs across from inception right through to end of life and everything in between, then we all start to understand that we're playing a transitory part in that process. So it's important that we make our point by giving the data to the best of our ability at that point, but then it goes in that sort of data backbone that then stays with the asset. So, you know, perhaps that's a good way of looking at it, that, you know, we're not here just for output, but we're here to make sure that we're getting the outcomes that we want.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we need to be able to evidence that we are delivering those outcomes. And I think a good way to do that is through data. You know, if you think about, again, I'll pick on water because I do a lot of work there, but, you know, there are outcome delivery incentives set by the regulator. And, you know, there's an ongoing challenge of, well, how do we evidence as an organisation that we are delivering against that outcome? And I think that data has a strong role to play, you know, within the context of an information management framework. And I think, you know, the power of AI is in helping us deliver some of that insight. You know, if we can make sure that we are collecting the right data in the right way, we can use artificial intelligence as a way to demonstrate that we're delivering the value and ultimately the prescribed outcomes.
Yeah, and because I think that evidence bit at the end on the outcomes is really important, because certainly in public sector, we're fighting for funding. You know, departments need to make the case, and if you can really start to evidence the impact of an intervention, then it's much better or much easier to then put our sort of public funding into where it's going to make the biggest difference, and it's evidence-based.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think there's a good opportunity as well for, you know, lessons learned, continuous improvement. You know, I think that's an area where on occasion we're weak in construction. You know, you see pockets of excellence all over the sector, but how do we make that business as usual? And I think the power of information management and data can really help us drive that continuous improvement approach. It was interesting hearing from David Hancock earlier around the platform approach, you know, and the benefits that can have to the industry. And as David said, that's underpinned by robust information and data. And I think if we can take that more standardized product-based approach, you know, AI can help us to continuously improve and ultimately drive up productivity across the sector.
Yeah, and I think our time's coming to an end, but I think that does lead us to UK construction productivity. It's not where we want it. We've got sort of stresses on the workforce. So things like standardization, offsite manufacture, all that sort of stuff, we desperately need. I think we as desperately we need people to really understand, organizations to really understand that they can resolve some of this productivity, profitability, workforce stresses by actually making a bit of time to invest in their sort of data structures now, and actually get them to inform that value stream, whatever it is for that organization or the larger part of the sector. So yeah, really good. I think that brings us to 12 o'clock. So I think that's us closed, I think. Is that right, Paul?